Elira was 16 years old the first time she felt it. It happened in the middle of a crowded pack hall, with music playing and people laughing all around her. She looked across the room and saw him, Kalen, and in that 1 second, her whole body went still. Something inside her, some part of her that she didn't even know existed until that moment, told her the truth. This was her mate. Not a boyfriend, not a crush. Her mate, the one person she was meant to be with for the rest of her life. She didn't tell anyone right away. She just watched him from a distance for weeks, waiting for him to feel it too. Mates were supposed to recognize each other. That was how it worked. But Kalen never looked at her the way she looked at him. Still, she waited. She told herself he just needed time. He was busy training to become alpha. He had wars to think about, land disputes, pack politics. Love could wait. So she was patient. She was, in her own quiet way, devoted. 3 years passed like that. 3 years of standing near him at gatherings, hoping he would notice. 3 years of small conversations that meant everything to her, and probably nothing to him. She told herself this was normal. She told herself that some bonds take time to grow. Then came the night that changed everything. It was called the Blood Moon Accord, a big ceremony where pack leaders made promises in front of everyone. Kalen stood at the front of the hall, tall and confident, wearing the deep red cloak that only an alpha could wear. Elira sat in the second row, hands folded on her lap, heart beating fast, thinking that maybe, finally, this was the night he would say her name. He said a name, just not hers. He said Sable, her own sister. For a moment, Elira thought she had misheard. She turned her head slightly, waiting for someone to correct the mistake, but no one did. Sable stood up from her seat, tears already falling down her cheeks, and walked toward Kalen like she had been expecting this her whole life. Maybe she had. Maybe everyone had known except Elira. Kalen took Sable's hands in his and told the whole pack that he had chosen her. Not because fate demanded it, but because he loved her. He said the words like they were romantic. Like choosing someone yourself was more special than fate choosing for you. The crowd clapped. Some people even cried happy tears. Elira sat frozen in her chair, watching her whole world get rearranged in front of 200 people. She did not cry. Not there. Not in front of anyone. She waited until she got home that night, locked her bedroom door, sat on the floor with her back against the bed, and let herself feel it all at once. The shame. The confusion. The specific kind of pain that comes from loving someone who chose your own sister instead of you. She didn't sleep that night. She barely slept for a week. But life doesn't stop for heartbreak. The next morning, she got up, washed her face, and went about her day like nothing had happened. That was the thing about Elira. She had a talent for looking calm on the outside, no matter what storm was happening inside her. Word of what happened spread through the pack quickly. People whispered about her when they thought she couldn't hear. Some felt sorry for her. Some thought it was almost funny, in a cruel kind of way, that fate had picked her and love had picked her sister instead. She heard all of it. She said nothing. 3 days after the ceremony, something unexpected happened. A group of strangers arrived at the edge of Blackthorn land. They wore black and silver, colors that everyone recognized immediately. They were from Ashfall Kingdom, the rival territory that had been fighting with Blackthorn Pack for as long as anyone could remember. Old wounds, old blood, old anger that never fully healed. The leader of the group asked to speak with Elira's father, the pack's senior elder. He said his king had sent him to remind Blackthorn Pack of an old agreement, something signed many years ago between the two territories, back when they were trying to end a war that had already cost too many lives. The agreement said that if either side asked for it, a daughter from the Blackthorn family would be given in marriage to the Ashfall king, to seal peace between the two lands permanently. Nobody expected them to actually use this old promise. It had been buried in paperwork for decades, almost forgotten. But apparently the new king of Ashfall, a man named Draven, was not interested in politics as usual. He wanted the marriage to happen, now. Elira's father's face went pale. Everyone in the room understood what this meant. There was only one daughter of proper age left to offer. Sable was already promised to Kalen. That left only one option. Before her father could even say her name, Elira stood up. "I'll go," she said. The room went quiet. Her father turned to look at her, surprised, maybe even a little relieved, though he tried to hide it. "Elira, you don't have to. I said I'll go," she repeated, her voice steady, almost too steady, like she had rehearsed the words in her head 1,000 times before actually saying them out loud. Nobody argued with her. Maybe because everyone secretly understood why she wanted to leave. Maybe because it was easier this way. Either way, within a week, Elira packed a single bag, said goodbye to a family that hadn't really fought to keep her, and left for a kingdom she had only ever heard about in old war stories. The journey to Ashfall took 2 full days. Elira spent most of it staring out the window of the carriage, watching the land change from familiar forests to unfamiliar hills, thinking about nothing and everything at the same time. She wondered what kind of man this King Draven was. She had heard he was cold, strict, someone who ruled with more silence than words. She had also heard he was dangerous, though nobody could ever explain exactly why they thought that. Maybe it was just because he was the enemy. Maybe enemies always sound more dangerous than they actually are. When she arrived at the Ashfall Castle, it was bigger and darker than anything she had ever seen. Stone walls that seemed to touch the sky. Guards standing so still they almost looked like statues. And at the top of a long staircase, waiting for her, stood the man she had been sent to marry. Draven was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that gave away absolutely nothing. He looked at her the way someone looks at a puzzle piece that doesn't quite match the picture on the box. "You're not the daughter I was told to expect," he said. No greeting, no warmth, just a fact, stated plainly. "No," Elira said. "I'm the other one." Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. The one whose mate chose her sister. Her spine went straight. Of course he knew. Everyone knew. Her heartbreak had apparently traveled faster than she had. "You understand what you're offering," he said. It wasn't a question. "Better than you understand what you're getting," she answered. He studied her for a long moment, like he was recalculating something in his head. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the castle, expecting her to follow. She did. The wedding happened 3 days later. There were no flowers picked with love, no long guest list of family and friends, no dancing late into the night. It was fast, formal, and completely without warmth. Elira wore a dress that belonged to nobody in particular, said vows that felt more like a business contract than a promise, and became Queen of Ashfall before she had even unpacked her bags. That first night, Draven gave her a private wing of the castle to live in, and told her, plainly, that he expected nothing from her beyond what the treaty required. No affection, no pretending, just peace between 2 kingdoms, sealed with a marriage neither of them had asked for. Strangely, Elira found this honest coldness easier to accept than warm lies. At least here, nobody was pretending to love her and then choosing someone else in front of a room full of people. At least here, the disappointment was up front instead of hidden behind sweet words. She decided, somewhere in those first few days, that she was not going to spend her new life as a quiet, forgotten queen, sitting in a castle wing, feeling sorry for herself. She had already spent 3 years waiting quietly for a man who never came. She wasn't going to spend the rest of her life waiting again. So she started working. She asked to see the kingdom's financial records first. The castle staff looked at her strangely, like queens weren't supposed to care about numbers and ledgers, but she didn't care what they expected. She spent long nights going through old paperwork, learning where the kingdom's money went, where it was wasted, and where it could be better spent. She found mistakes that had been sitting untouched for years. She fixed some of them without even asking permission. Word of this got back to Draven eventually. He found her one evening in the castle library, papers spread across the table in front of her, ink stains on her fingers, hair falling loose from the bun she'd tied that morning. "You're doing the treasurer's job," he said, standing in the doorway. "Your treasurer is doing it badly," she replied, not looking up. He didn't argue. He just walked further into the room, picked up one of the papers she had marked with corrections, read it silently, and set it back down. "Keep going," he said, and left. It wasn't affection, it wasn't warmth, but it was something, a small crack in the cold wall between them. Over the following months, small moments like that kept happening. She would fix a problem in the kingdom's affairs, and instead of being told to stay in her place, she would find that Draven had quietly allowed her more responsibility. She started sitting in on meetings with pack elders. At first they resisted her opinions, uncomfortable with a foreign queen speaking so directly, but she had a way of cutting straight through unnecessary arguments and getting to the real problem, and slowly, one meeting at a time, they started listening to her instead of talking over her. Draven noticed all of this. He didn't say much about it out loud, but he started finding reasons to be in the same room as her more often. A meeting he technically didn't need to attend. A walk through the castle gardens at the exact time she usually walked there. Small things. The kind of things a careful, guarded man does when he's trying to be near someone without admitting that's what he's doing. Elira noticed too, but she didn't let herself hope for anything. Hope, she had learned, was expensive. She had already paid too high a price for it once. Then came the summit. Once a year, the two kingdoms held a joint gathering, a tradition meant to keep the old treaty alive and remind both sides that peace was still worth protecting. This year, for the first time since Elira's wedding, Blackthorn and Ashfall packs were forced into the same hall together. Elira knew Kaelin would be there. She had known it for weeks, and she had told herself, over and over, that it wouldn't matter, that she was past it, that seeing him again would feel like nothing at all. It did not feel like nothing. The moment she saw him across the hall, standing next to Sable, who now wore a Luna's crown and a look of comfortable happiness on her face, something old and unhealed twisted in Elira's chest. She kept her expression calm. She had gotten very good at that. During a break in the formal meetings, Kaelin found her alone in a side corridor. He looked older than she remembered. Tired, maybe. Or maybe just older in the way people look when they've been carrying something heavy without putting it down. "I never stopped thinking you'd understand," he said, without any greeting first. "You were always stronger than she was. I thought you'd survive it fine." Elira looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I did survive it," she said quietly. "That's not the same as it being fine." She turned and walked away, before he could turn his words into an apology. The kind of apology that costs the person giving it nothing but demands everything from the person receiving it. She didn't see Draven standing near the doorway until she almost walked straight into him. He had heard the last part of the conversation. She could tell by his face, which had gone unusually still. He didn't say anything about it that night. He didn't offer comfort or ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, later that evening, she found her favorite reading chair had been moved into his private study, without explanation, without a note, just placed there like it had always belonged. It was such a small thing, a chair, but it said something bigger than words could. It said, without saying it directly, that he had seen her pain, and instead of poking at it, he had simply made a small space for her to sit in, near him, without demanding anything from her. She sat in that chair almost every evening after that. Weeks passed, then months. The kingdom grew stronger under her quiet management. The pack elders who once doubted her now came to her directly with problems before taking them to Draven. She had earned something she hadn't expected to find in a marriage built purely on politics. Respect. Real respect. The kind that isn't given, but earned one decision at a time. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, something else grew too, so slowly that Elira almost didn't notice it happening. It happened, in the end, on an ordinary evening. No music, no fireworks, no cosmic sign from the universe telling her this was fate. Just Draven walking into the study where she sat reading, setting a cup of tea down on the table beside her, exactly the way she liked it, with exactly the right amount of honey. Something she had mentioned once, months earlier, in passing, and apparently he had remembered ever since. She looked up at him, surprised. "You've been paying attention," she said. "I pay attention to things that matter," he answered simply. It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't poetry, but it landed harder than any of Kaelin's carefully chosen public words ever had. A few weeks later, Draven sat across from her one evening after the castle had gone quiet, and said something he had clearly been building up the courage to say for a while. "I don't know if I'm your fated mate," he told her. "I know I'm the one who's here." Alira didn't answer right away. She thought about the years she had spent waiting for a bond that fate had promised her, only to watch it get handed to someone else. She thought about how much of her life she had spent believing that fate was the only thing that mattered, that love wasn't real unless the universe forced it into existence. "Maybe that's better," she finally said. "A bond fate gives you, you don't have to earn. What we have, we built. I trust that more." Something shifted in his face then, something rare and unguarded, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Ashfall, he smiled at her, really smiled, not the polite, distant expression he wore in public, but something private, something just for her. The next summit happened almost a year after the first one. Alira walked into that same hall again, except this time everything felt different. She wasn't the quiet, forgotten sister anymore. She wasn't the woman standing in someone else's shadow, waiting to be chosen. She walked in as the Queen of Ashfall, respected by her own people, standing beside a king who made sure everyone in that hall understood exactly where he stood. Kaelin watched from across the room as Draven's hand rested gently at the small of Alira's back. Not possessive, not performing for anyone, just present, natural, the kind of small touch that only happens between two people who trust each other completely. Something like realization, something like regret, arriving 5 years too late to matter. He had spent his whole life believing that love was something you had to choose, that fate was something you could override with your own decisions. And in a strange way, he had been right, just not in the way he thought. He had chosen Sable over fate, and maybe that was fine for him. But watching Alira now, watching the quiet certainty between her and Draven, he finally understood the difference between choosing someone because it's easy and choosing someone every single day because it's real. Alira never went back to being the woman who got left behind. She became something else entirely. Not the sister who was passed over, not the mate who wasn't chosen. She became the queen a rival king kept choosing, over and over, one ordinary day at a time, long after the wedding, long after the treaty had already been fulfilled, long after anyone required either of them to stay. Because that's the thing about the bonds people build, instead of the ones fate hands them. Nobody forces you to keep choosing. You just do, every single day, simply because you want to. And in the end, that turned out to be worth more than any fated bond ever could have been.